Hey everyone, welcome back to Screen Review. My name is Megan.
Hi, I'm Dina, and before we start, make sure to follow our socials, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Boca Tribune, and follow us on YouTube.
So today we're going to be reviewing a Netflix movie. It just came out. It's called I'm Thinking of Ending Things. It is 2 hours and 14 minutes, and it is rated R. So as usual, we're just going to go ahead and give our general thoughts of the movie before jumping into, symbolism and plot type things. So Dina, general thoughts, what do you think?
So at initial kind of viewing of the movie, you kind of are confused, to say the least. It's a very strange, kind of weird movie, but on like inspection after the fact, once you kind of look back on the movie, you're like, oh wait, that makes sense. It kind of all kind of comes together in the end. But it is a strange movie. But the acting is incredible, I will say. I'm not quite sure the actors' names, but the acting is really good, and the characters are really good, kind of like how the actors themselves develop the characters, as well as the director and writer, Charlie Kaufman. His script is like well beyond my English language knowledge, and it's really good, I think. What about you, Megan?
I would agree. I mean, of course, everything you said. It is a very confusing movie. Again, 2 hours and 14 minutes. I feel like I talk a lot about 2-hour movies. It's like the norm. They're all over 2 hours now, and that's fine. It's just a little bit. It drags on a little bit, especially if you miss little details like in the beginning. I know we were talking about. So definitely, if you're going to give this movie a try, pay attention to the beginning. It's more important than you think. It starts off a little dry, but if you don't pay attention to the beginning, you might be lost for a majority of the rest of the movie, I would say. So definitely important picking up the little details. But I will also say that it's a very pretty movie to look at. Like I know that I think in one of the quotes is like in a bleak kind of way. I mean, it's very heavy on their snow. It's snowing the whole time pretty much. So, as a Floridian person, I enjoy seeing that. I'm sure it's bitter cold for them, but I enjoy the idea of snow, having living in sunshine all the time. So
for sure.
Yeah, I enjoyed the movie overall. Again, maybe not when I was watching it, but like Dina was saying afterward, any movie that really prompts me to, immediately watch kind of an explanation video or read interviews with anyone, related to the movie, I would say that's a good movie because it prompts me to want to know more about it versus just kind of watching it and being like, that was good,
Mm-hmm. I agree. I always think like movies that make you think if you think about them after the movie, that means it was a good movie.
Yeah, I would agree to that as well for sure. So I guess general thoughts, convoluted, very weird the whole time. So those kinds of movies aren't really your thing. I would probably say steer clear, but I liked it overall.
Yeah, me too. I agree.
So if you haven't seen it already, go ahead and watch it on Netflix. Come back to our YouTube, Facebook, whatever later and watch it and watch the rest of this review. But now we're going to kind of jump into the plot of the movie and a little bit more in depth of what we thought about specific things that happened. So Dina, if you want to bring us, I know we're going to break this kind of down into like 3 or 4 major parts of the movie. So I guess we'll just start with, the beginning and the car ride in the beginning. So if you want us to go ahead and take us there.
So the first part is the car ride to our main character's, I guess, boyfriend. Jake is driving our main character, we'll call her Lucy for now, his parents' house. And so the first part of the movie, you're kind of in this car ride. It's supposedly long, but you kind of look, and honestly, like I was looking and it just looked like they were staying in one place the entire time, but they're in this car ride, whatever. And you kind of start with this like inner monologue that, what's her name? Lucy is having. Yes, thank you. She's having this is why I pay close attention to details because she's kind of just like, I don't really know what's happening here. I don't really know how long I've been dating this guy, but we've been dating and like, I don't really know long, but he's always been there, but I don't really know when it started, but we've kind of always been together, but I'm thinking of ending things is basically her whole thing, which is the name of the movie, which I love when they do that.
Me too.
Especially not in like weird ways. Sometimes they do it really weirdly. And so basically they're like in this drive and you kind of get introduced to this character. Jake is this like nice, I guess, easygoing guy in the beginning, kind of, he's seems caring and seems sweet. And then Lucy is supposedly basically the movie, part of its confusingness is her job and her degree kind of keep changing. So in the beginning, she has this like paper due on Wednesday. So she has to be home that night from Jake's parents' house, which was like a huge thing for her.
Mhm.
But then at one point, she's a poet and she has this like incredible poem that she recites to Jake. And it's very confusing. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, no, in the beginning for sure, I was just thinking to myself, this is a really knowledgeable, lovely person, like the
Yeah.
girl, she's just very educated and everything. So it is
Mhm.
important to pay attention in the beginning because little things like that, you're like, how can one person be doing all of this? And of course, later that's more important. And I will say, I know you said, Jake comes across as like this loving, caring boyfriend, but I found him to be a little creepy.
Yes.
He puts off kind of creepy vibes in the beginning as
Mhm.
well, I will say. So sure, he says the right things, he cares and listens and does all of that, but he just puts off a vibe that's a little uncomfortable. I wouldn't want to be in a car for an extended period of time with him, I would say.
Yeah.
So, and
I
it is definitely interesting to think about.
I definitely agree. Spoiler alert, but we're hoping that at this point you've already watched the movie.
Yes.
Jake is also kind of the same character as the janitor, they say. The janitor is essentially like Jake in the future, I guess, kind of looking back on his life. I read an interview, so did Megan, with the director, and he says he supposedly made it very clear in the beginning
I
that the
know.
janitor and Jake are the same person. Personally, I did not catch that. Again, in the beginning, pay attention because I didn't catch
Yeah,
it until like halfway through the movie, where I was like,
same.
oh my God, wait a minute. They're the same, aren't they? And I thought I was
Mhm.
revolutionary for that, but then I read the interview and the director was like, "No, no, no. That it was shown in
Mhm.
the beginning pretty explicitly." And I was like, "Didn't catch that." But
No. Yeah, I missed it as well, so I felt kind of dumb when I made the connection later, and I was like, "Oh, I
uh-huh.
could have been enjoying it for the whole time instead of just now pretty much halfway through," you
Because
know?
I kept making
Mhm.
weird theories throughout.
Same.
Yeah.
Mhm.
But basically, the whole thing is that, Jake is basically the janitor is Jake in the future, kind of, I guess, looking back on his life, how it could have been if he met this girl, whatever. So that's why, again, Lucy, her profession keeps changing because it's kind of Jake's fantasy keeps changing about her. Like, oh, at one point he's like, oh, I kind of want her to be, like some biological researcher or whatever. And then the next he's like, she should be a poet. That sounds right. I'm going to make the girl of my dreams a poet. So that's why she
Mhm.
kind of keeps changing, right? So
Mhm.
this drive is just very long and yeah, it's just a
Yeah, it's
very weirdly long
mhm.
drive.
No, it's just painstakingly long. Not only because I guess the drive itself may be long, but the conversation that they have is
Mhm,
just like a deeply philosophical, like intellectual conversation they're having with one another. Because again, in Jake's eyes, he's with this educated, amazing person. Maybe she's a poet, maybe she's a quantum physicist, like maybe she's all these things. So she's so well versed in all of these topics. And so they just have really, like we were saying, long winded conversations about certain poems. And I mean, he even mentions a poem to her and he says that it's about a woman, a beautiful idealized woman named Lucy who dies young. and
mhm.
at that point in the movie that is her name, the name that she assumes in the movie, because again her name changes a lot. And so it's just interesting that this is kind of, I guess, what he's thinking along the lines of, he made a beautiful idealized woman for
Which
her,
at
of
yeah,
her.
and at that point, I thought she was gonna die by the end of the movie. I
Oh,
thought
me
that was,
too.
like, alluding to, like, death.
Mhm. Yeah, and again, another little spoiler again, and hopefully you've left by now. She isn't even real, and so
Yeah,
at that point, I thought she was, and so I was like, oh man, she's gonna
mhm.
die.
She was gonna die, but little did we know she didn't. She wasn't alive to begin with.
No, no, not this version of her at least.
Yeah,
Um, mhm.
so at this point, I guess we can go into, like, I guess the second part where,
I guess maybe the poem I just want to mention really
oh,
quickly.
yeah, yeah, the
But
poem,
yeah, I
sorry,
know.
sorry.
No, you're fine. I know that we did mention they were having these like deep philosophical, intellectual conversations. So at one point, again, Lucy kind of assumes the position of being this poet. And so Jake says, "Oh, the car ride's really long. Like, just like perform to me one of your poems. Like, I love hearing them in your voice." And so then she performs this like real bummer of a poem, and it's really, really long, and it's really dark. And essentially, what it is, it's about the dread someone feels when coming home, and you'd rather be at work because coming home is just a real letdown, and it's just there's nothing to come home to that makes you excited. You come home to a wife or like a wife-shaped silhouette or something like that, it said in the poem. So it was just saying essentially home life is the worst, and I'd rather be at work even if I hate work because I hate my home life that much more. So again, real bummer of a poem. And then Jake afterwards is all choked up over, and he says like, wow, it's so beautiful. Like I thought that like it sounds like it was written exactly about me. And again, because Jake is the janitor, you can kind of see how this reflects his life to where, you know, even though he is kind of in a bad position in his job, it seems he's unhappy there. I guess coming home is even worse than being at work. So.
And it also, at one point later in the movie, we found out that that poem is actually like a real poem in a book that Jake / the janitor read in real life. And also I want to add that I actually read more. This movie is based on a book. And in the book, they explain the janitor / Jake's character better. And they say that apparently he was like very intellectual, like this very big researcher guy when he was younger. And then like, I guess he got some sickness, I guess, at one point, or like he kind of descended into madness and he had to move back home to his family's farmhouse. So I guess it kind of alludes to that where he's like, I miss my old life type of thing. And like he doesn't want to be home. Which is really sad when I read that. I was like, oh, poor guy. No wonder he's making all these fantasies and working as a janitor at his high school. Like,
yeah. So I guess, I mean, at this point in the movie, I think it's at this point at least, it's like you're kind of flashing as the viewer back and forth between the car ride and then kind of the janitor's life. And so I know that like, because the car ride is like painfully silent. And so they're just filling the air with talking. And so at one point, Jake goes to turn on the radio and it's just like this, I mean, you know, I love musical theater, sure. It's this god-awful song from the musical Oklahoma, and he just absolutely loves it. And he's like, oh, I know all about musical theater, and he lists all of these things that all these productions that he's seen or is knowledgeable about. And then he kind of mentioned something weird, which is another hint that Jake is the janitor. And he says like, oh, like, you know, the kids put on a production every year. And it's so they put on a production every year. I don't think he says the kids, but he says they. And so at that point, the viewer, you switch to the auditorium where the janitor is, and you see, you know, high school students on stage performing just a beautiful production. Like, yeah,
it was very well.
They were really good
for being high schoolers.
I know. So regardless, that's a kind of another hint to the audience that, you know, if apparently in Kaufman's words, you know, if it wasn't obvious enough already. Kind of went over my head at that point, but regardless,
same.
So I mean, I think Oklahoma is going to be kind of a major recurring thing throughout the rest of the movie. That's why I mention it. So I think that now we can probably talk about the farmhouse, which it gets even weirder from here. You know, it's not really weird yet, but it gets there.
I mean, it was pretty weird, but you know,
it gets worse.
Now we scratch the surface. At this point, we go to his Jake's parents / the janitor, I guess, his parents' farmhouse, which is like literally in the middle of nowhere. It's like pouring snow, as we said. And Jake gets there and he's like, let me show you around the farm before we walk in. And let's just say before that, there was like this 45-second scene of Jake's mom in the window just waving at them, which was already so freaky, like this. And like they were just waving back and she just wouldn't stop. And I was like, this is giving me horror movie vibes. What's going on? And especially after this, I got even more horror movie vibes. They go to the farmhouse and there's like dead lambs like sitting there. And she's like, and the girl is like, so what's happening with these lambs? And he's like, well, they're already dead and frozen. Like, what's there to do now? And I was like,
I know, he got so defensive about it. He's like, what do you want to do? Solid. Like, what do you want me to do? It's just like, I'm sorry.
Like, dispose of it? I don't know.
Bury them?
He gets into this really creepy story about how there used to be pigs at their farm, but they found, it's so gross. They found out that like, you know, they couldn't take care of the pigs for a few days, so they just fed them, but they didn't look at the pigs. And then one day, like his dad went to look at their pigs in the farm and they found them all huddled in the corner. So his dad lifted one of the pigs up and found out that maggots were eating the pigs like from the inside out, or like whatever, like just eating them. And like the pigs were basically dead at this point, which also very important. Remember that for later. But I was so disgusted when I saw that. I was like, ew. He was like being really dramatic about it. I will say, like, it wasn't that big of a deal, but it's still disgusting. And like I was like, ew.
Yeah, like it's clearly something that like affected him deeply. I mean, that's
Mhm.
pretty horrifying, I would say.
Which I guess
Just
later in the movie
mhm.
when you realize, like, at least for us, since we didn't figure out until later that the janitor is Jake, and then, like, the last scene in the movie, again, spoiler, hopefully, you watch the whole movie at this point, he kind of sees the pig, so I guess it was kind of like when he's, like, dying, he sees that maggot-infested pig, so I guess it really did, like, affect him, so I guess him looking back on his life like that, I don't know, just very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, just not
Gross.
great. Yeah, just gross for sure. So after
Yeah.
this nice little uplifting tour of the farmhouse,
Mhm.
they go inside and the parents are nowhere to be found. They're
Mhm.
like upstairs or something. Like they're just not coming down to say hi. So it's just Jake and then Lucy. We'll again call her Lucy. And
Mhm.
so, he's giving kind of like almost like a little bit of a tour. I think he lights a fire, like they just sit down and wait. And then,
Mhm.
Lucy at this point is like, oh, like this reminds me of my own childhood home. And because she also grew up on a farmhouse, it's mentioned later, and things like that. So she kind of
But then
resonates with him in that.
at one point, she also mentions that she grew up in an apartment. It kept changing because she was
Yes.
like he was showing her the basement. He was like, "It's really freaky down there," and she was
Hmm.
like, "Oh, I never had a basement growing up. I lived in an apartment." And so I was like,
Exactly.
"What?" I was very
Hmm.
confused.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So at this point, she grew up in a farmhouse, but later it always changes. Everything about her changes.
Mhm.
Even her name. That's why again, Dina and I were talking about it earlier. That if you watch movies with subtitles on, it'll just say "young woman" for her every time
Mhm.
that she speaks, and so that's
Mhm.
kind of like a big tell into who she is because she's not assuming any of the names that she's being given throughout the movie.
Mhm.
So at this point, I mean, there's also a baby photo on the wall that she notices, and she's like,
Oh,
"What?
yeah.
Yeah." She's like, "Oh, what is this? Like, this is a picture of me." And then the camera, takes away from the picture, and then he's like, "That's what are you talking about? Like, that's a picture of me." And then as a viewer, we see the picture again, and it's him. So it's just
So
interesting that like that's happened. Go ahead.
so at that point, I thought they were the same person, like, reflected
Yes.
on each other, which they kind of were because she was, like, a figment of his, like, subconscious, I guess, but, like, I thought they were, like, supposed to, like, reflect one another,
Yeah.
but yeah. And so at
Mhm.
this point, I guess, like, we can get to, like, her parents themselves, which are really creepy.
Yeah. Yeah. His parents were
So
not great.
they were really weird. His mom was, like, smiling and kept laughing, and she was just a very giddy person, but, like, unnaturally giddy, like,
Like
horror
it didn't
movie
like an
giddy.
insane giddy. Like she was not
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
mentally stable kind of giddy.
Yeah,
Like it
which he
was
did
just
mention earlier that his
mhm,
mother was sick, but
mhm,
it was freaky. Yeah,
mhm.
so and then his dad was just, like, British, which was just really random,
What?
and he had a Band-Aid on his face, like a bandage that I don't know if you
Mhm,
noticed this, I didn't really notice this until later. It kept moving to different parts of his face, and then at one point, it just wasn't there anymore. Like, at
mhm.
one point, it was, like, on this side of his head, then it was, like, here, and then it was, like, here, and then it just wasn't
Interesting,
there.
yeah. No, I
And
didn't know
so
that. I just missed it.
yeah, which was, like, just kind of weird, I don't know.
No, that
And so
definitely is weird. The whole dinner scene was just like suffocatingly awkward.
and I
Mhm,
Megan and I talked about it, how the mom and, like, the girl, young woman, kind of, like, leached off of each other with their personalities, which kind of brought even more to the fact that this girl was not real, right?
mhm.
Yeah, it was really
Yeah.
freaky.
Yeah, no, because she kept changing, and then at this point, the mother says, "Oh, like I love stories. Like, can you just tell me how you met? Like, I want to hear how you met." And so then
Mhm,
Lucy, young woman, jumps into this really long, kind of sloppy story about how they met.
mhm,
And so, it was at a trivia night. She went with her friend and then she met Jake. But again, the story was really jumbled and all over the place. And she kept stuttering over her words. And so Jake had
yeah,
to interject and like correct her and help her on the story because she didn't really remember it that well, you could say. It didn't happen. So
yeah,
Jake was kind of making up the story as he was going in his own figment of his imagination, his own fantasy that he's created. So, and throughout this whole entire scene, like Dina was saying, the comparison can be made between Lucy and then his mother because she was also kind of maniacally laughing the whole time in a similar way to how the mother did. And so it was just a weird scene altogether. And
mhm,
so regardless, so she said something along the lines of like, "Oh, and I could tell that like he wanted my number, but he was too shy to ask for it, so he just blurted it out, and I just gave him my number." And so that's
Yeah.
interesting. I will mention something about that later when they reflect on this kind of story again. So that's the only reason I mention it. It's not, it's
Yeah.
important.
It was very strange. And then I will say at one point, like, his parents were, like, reflecting on his own childhood, and, they were like, "Oh, remember your 50th birthday?"
Yes.
And then she was like, "Oh, wait, no, 20th." So at this point, I was like, "Okay, so he's the janitor. He's definitely the janitor," because I was like yeah. And so but then I was also kind of confused as to who his parents were. I was still but at that point, I was very sure that he was the janitor, and
Mhm.
so that was just, like, a moment for me where it just kind of clicked in my head. And also at this point was that mini movie that was really
Yes.
weird. Not
Mhm.
really I don't really know the symbolism to that, you do better, but I will say there was, like, a point where we shift to the janitor kind of watching a movie, and it's, like, some romance movie, um, and, like, it was just so strange. You wanna talk more about that? 'Cause you were talking about the symbolism for that.
Mhm. Yes. So this movie essentially, like, I guess it's the janitor, he's in the school, he's on his lunch break. And essentially what it is, it's this kind of, romantic, not even comedy, it's a romantic type movie. And the setting is it's this waitress and she works at a diner and she has, a customer at the table and he's asking a question, oh, do you prefer like the Santa Fe burger or the other burger? I don't remember what it was called. And so she kind of jumps into an explanation like, oh, they're both so good. Like they both have benefits. If anyone's been in the customer service serving industry, like I have, that's kind of the answer you give. But then there's this guy next to her and he says like, oh, well, she's vegan. Like she hasn't eaten any of this. Like she has not let, dairy or meat like pass her lips since she was 5 years old. And so she's kind of like shooing him out of the restaurant because she's like, this is my table. Like they can't, we don't, if I'm
Yeah.
vegan, they don't need to know. But regardless, so she, kind of shoos him out of the restaurant and ends up getting fired over it because this guy's screaming about how she's going to be an animal rights lawyer and she cares about animals and that guy's a bad regardless. And so at the end of this little movie that we watch, he says, I love you to her, and she's like, oh, you love me though, like I love
Yeah.
you too. Like it's
Uh-huh.
just so weird. And so the janitor's watching this, and then at the end it says, directed by Robert Zemeckis. I think is how you pronounce it. And so
Zemeckis, I think.
I think it's like that. So I
Yeah.
guess essentially the point of showing this movie and showing the director's name at the end is because this guy, I guess, is known for making kind of unrealistic type movies. He was the writer for Back to the Future. He directed Forrest Gump, like all these kind of crazy, unrealistic type movies, you would say. And so this kind of
Yeah.
shows the janitor or Jake's perception of, I guess, romantic things. Romance, that's the word. So it kind of shows, this perception of romance and how it's kind of broken for him in a sense where, like, if you get me fired from my job, I don't care if you tell me that you love me. I'm probably not going to say it back or, even be happy about it. So again, it just shows that he's watching this and these are the kinds of things that he thinks about and that he
Right.
likes, supports.
So then at this point, we're back into after this like kind of crazy weird movie scene that like I thought was cool, that there was like a movie in the movie. We go back to where like I guess young woman Lucy is and Jake in their parents' house, and the parents and Jake kind of just like disappear for a minute. It was just really weird. They just kind of vanish. So Lucy kind of goes to Jake's childhood bedroom and finds these books, and she finds a book that had that poem that she said earlier about coming home and like it being really depressing. So she finds it, and then his father comes out of nowhere, and his father is very old at this point. He's old and he has dementia. She doesn't even bat an eye. She's like, "Oh, are you okay, sir?" And he's like talking about like her staying the night, and she's like, "No, no, no, like I have to leave." Again, the recurring theme of like she's like, "I have to leave tonight." And so she whatever, she like leaves the room. They both leave the room, and she walks out the room and she finds Jake's mother is like he's like feeding her mother because she's so old and like sickly, and she's like, "Oh, it's very nice of you to like be such a good son, but can I mention earlier he was very kind of strange to his parents earlier. He was very like, I hate my mom, she's annoying type to his parents earlier, and now he's like taking care of her." So it's kind of like a shift in his attitudes, I guess, like a shift in his what he wants to be to this girl type of thing, right?
Definitely. And I will say earlier during the dinner or right before they disappear and all these weird age things kind of start happening, Lucy at this point does get a phone call. And this is the second time I believe that her phone has been ringing. The first time I was in the car and she didn't answer. This is the second time now that she's gotten this phone call. And you see the caller ID and it's from someone named Lucy. And so at this point, you're kind of like, there's no chance in this movie that, her friend is actually calling her, as she says, it's my friend. Like, my friend's okay. That has the same name as her. So this is another kind of clue to that, she's not real in a sense. So it's whatever. She's kind of really pressured by the entire family to pick up the phone call. They're like, oh, there's a blizzard outside. Like, your friend could need help. Just pick up the phone. So she picks up the phone and listens to the message. And it's this really creepy message. Like, first, it's like kind of in an older man's voice. And it's a really cryptic message. I think it says right here, I have a little quote for it. It says, there's only one question to resolve. I'm scared. I feel a little crazy. I'm not lucid. The assumptions are right. I can feel my fear growing. Essentially, he's like, now the time is for the answer. Like, there's one question to answer. And so then she listens to that terrifying message, hangs up the phone and says, my friend's fine. And
yeah.
And that's it.
That's the janitor, though, like, as he's older.
It is. Yeah, it is. It's the janitor. And again, because Lucy is now kind of an extension of Jake's mind and Jake's thoughts and these projections of all this love, I guess you could say that, it's time to make the decision, I'm thinking of ending things, we'll say. So regardless, continuing on. So now all these kinds of crazy back and forth of the ages of the parents as you move through the house, as Lucy moves through the house. So,
So then they become young, and keep in mind, as they're becoming young, she goes down to this creepy basement that they mentioned, and they're in this she's in this basement, and like she's doing the laundry. And as she's doing the laundry, I think it's like his janitor uniform or like something, because it says like HS, which I'm assuming is high school, like stuff in the laundry. And so she goes around the basement and she finds her own paintings that she mentioned earlier. It wasn't obviously her own paintings, but like earlier at one point in her career change of the past hour, she was a painter and she had her own paintings. And so she sees her own paintings, and then she goes on her phone, and there's no pictures on her phone, which was weird because earlier she showed Jake's parents pictures of her paintings. Very strange. She goes back up the stairs, and his parents are old again. But keep in mind, I forgot to mention this. When she's going down the stairs, really weird scene that genuinely confused me. Do you remember it?
It was like mom?
No. It was like Jake was like telling her like, you don't have to go downstairs, but like it was like his voice was like muffled, and then like she turns around, turns back, and he like disappears, and all she sees is like snow. I was very confused. I was like, I can't even explain that scene to you because like I just didn't understand it.
I guess maybe it could be. I mean, because what my assumption is
changing the story.
Well, I guess my assumption would be, maybe this entire story is being played out in the mind of the janitor of Jake when he's in his car already. Is my only thing that I could think of at the end of the movie. He's already in there and he's just letting, the snow come down on the car, on himself. Again, spoiler. Regardless, that's the only thing that I could think of to kind of justify that. But no, regardless, when you're watching it, you're like,
what? Yeah.
Like, he's right up the stairs. Why is he muffled? Why is it snowing inside? But regardless, and the thing with the mom that I mentioned earlier, this little thing, Dina said, do you remember that scene? I said it wasn't the mom. She says it like weird. She's super young and she's running around like picking up all the toys, and she tells Lucy, Jake's controlling, live dangerously, go in the basement. So that's the only thing. Like, it's strange. It's the only thing that I thought you could have meant.
Yeah, I guess it's like his controlling of his mind. Like, they're all characters in his mind, I guess.
Exactly. I guess.
So anyway, at this point, I guess we can just go into the drive back, right? Because like this is basically the end of that.
It is. I mean, the mom dies kind of.
Kind of.
So I guess in the last scene, right before they leave, it's the mom on her deathbed and Jake is crying by the bed, and then he's like, "Okay, let's leave." Like, they leave. And that's pretty much it. So that was definitely strange. So yes, the drive back, which again is even worse,
even weirder.
It's even
weirder somehow. Yeah. So like now Lucy, young woman, I guess, her like essay thing turned into like this essay about a movie. Before it was like a research paper. Now it's an essay that's due Wednesday. And the actress that plays her changes for like a split second as she's like explaining this movie, and they're like having this whole argument about it. And her voice changes, and it's a new actress. She's smoking a cigarette. It's supposed to be a commentary on this one actress this one person that I keep forgetting the name of. Her name is Pauline Kael. I don't know who that is, but that's who she's
But I know
impersonating.
her
Apparently,
name.
I know her name. She's blonde. That's all I know. And
Yeah.
apparently, she's impersonating her, and she like has this like accent going on. Very strange. But yeah, it was just a weird scene. I was very confused at the point of it, as of every scene in the movie. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. It was weird. And I will say that, what she says kind of explaining this movie, she's directly quoting that actress, like Dina was saying. She's like, it's a direct verbatim, she's saying the same things. That's kind of why you see her transform for a second there. And I will also say, I think right before that this happened, Lucy's memory of the night seemed a little foggy. So her and Jay are talking about it, and he's like, "Oh, they liked you." Like, when I was washing the dishes with mom, like she said she really liked you. And Lucy's like, I don't remember that. And he's like, "Oh, you were drunk."
Yeah. Basically, that was
Yeah.
I will say at this point we're gonna have like a little ad break. We'll reconvene after. Yeah.
Yeah. So stay with us. We'll be right back. All right, welcome back. So again, we're reviewing I'm Thinking of Ending Things. We're pretty much halfway through now. And as always, follow us on our social media sites at Boca Tribune. So let's continue. So at this point, yes, they're on the car ride back from the dinner. And I think other than that, I mean, we mentioned the thing about the other film they mentioned, right? And then Jake gets this weird craving. What was the ice cream shop called again?
Oh,
it's like
Tulsi Town. Tulsi Town,
yeah,
yes.
Tulsi Town or something. He's like, "Oh, like you want Tulsi Town?" It's like, "I want ice cream right now." And keep in mind, again, it's the middle of a blizzard.
Yeah, literally in the middle of a blizzard. And I will say it's funny because they're in the middle of a blizzard, and Tulsi Town is basically supposed to be like Dairy Queen, and their blizzards. But I read an interview, and Charlie Kaufman said they didn't get the rights to that, so they had to switch it up a little bit, which I thought was funny. But it's funny because they were getting blizzards in the blizzard.
Yeah. So it's just like a really random thing. So he gets a sudden craving for this. And so, yeah, they stop at Tulsi Town, and Jake is really weird about it. He says like, "Oh, they walk up to the little shack in the middle of nowhere. It's just like a weird freestanding establishment." And so he's like looking around, he's looking inside the building, and he's like, "Oh, I'm just trying to check it out to see like if the people that I know that work here, like I want to see who's working tonight." And Lucy's like, "Do you go here often?" Like it's so strange. And so he's like, "Oh, I usually come and grab a blizzard, a burr, they call it, on the way back from visiting my mom and dad." And so these two young blonde women come out, and I guess they're like teenagers, like high school age or so. And so then they see Lucy and Jake is turned, his back is to them. He's like hiding from them essentially. And he's forcing Lucy to order for him. And so Lucy's like, "Oh, I'll get this." And she's like, "Oh, Jake, like, what do you want?" He's like, "Oh, same, I'll have the same." And so then these two girls start laughing at him. They're like, "Oh, haha, like two sames, like coming right up." And then another third person comes up, and she's short, brown hair. She's rashes all over her body. And then she starts making the food. And she's like, "Oh, I'm sorry for the smell. Like they're varnishing the wood in the back, the shells. I'm sorry." And so this whole scene is just very strange because you have the two blonde girls on the one side laughing at him and making fun, "Oh, two sames are making fun of him." And then this is one person making the actual food and apologizing, and it's really nice. And then right before Lucy and Jake leave, she gives kind of this cryptic warning to Lucy where she says like, "Oh, don't go forward. Like, don't leave.
Yeah.
Like, you don't have to go forward if you don't want to."
And she's like, "I'm worried for you."
Yes, exactly. So at this point, it's kind of a weird message that she's giving to Lucy. And again, if you keep in mind at this point, I guess we can kind of hopefully know that Lucy's not real and she's just kind of an extension of Jake's mind. So I guess it's a warning to Jake himself, like, you can stay here, like, don't, I'm worried for you, like, don't move forward, don't go forward in time. Because again, I guess kind of at this point think that I'm Thinking of Anything probably isn't necessarily pertaining to the relationship because there is no relationship at this point.
Right. And I will say that she, the young woman, I guess, was kind of saying how what's her name? The girl that they were talking to, like, looks familiar. And there's a split second where you can see that both her, this girl at Tulsi Town, and Jake have the same rashes on their hands. I don't know if you noticed that. Like, for a split second, he was like taking the blizzard, or they call blur, from her hands, and you see that they have the same rash. And so it was just a very strange scene. And so at that point, I was actually thought that like this was about to be some psychotic, like Jake kind of is holding every person in this town hostage and they're all going crazy type of thing. I was like, oh my God, this is terrifying. I would be so stressed in this situation. But anyways, they end up leaving Tulsi Town after his quick, crazy craving, right? That was basically the end of that.
Basically, I will say though that I read a little interview later, and apparently the two blonde girls that were laughing at him, making fun of him, they're supposed to represent, because they mentioned at the dinner, and the mom mentions at least, that Jake growing up never really had any friends. And I think this is when she slips up and says, oh, you remember like your 20th birthday? And I guess kind of alludes to the fact that no one was there. So this is kind of a reflection, I guess, on the people that made fun of him in school, and the fact that he never did have friends. So that's right. I guess the point of them per se. Yeah. I guess. We feel bad for him. He's all
poor guy. Yeah. But at that point, I did think he was psychotic. So, anyways, they did leave Tulsi Town, and this is actually my bad. This is the part where like the actress changes for a minute, and like she's like impersonating that person, Pauline, whatever, about this movie. Yeah, whatever. And so, he's like freaking out. They both take like 3 bites of their burrs or blizzards or whatever, and then they're like, oh, I'm full. And she's like, okay, let's just go home and we'll throw it away there. And he's like, no, we have to stay here. Again, at this point, I'm fully under the impression that this is a psychotic man about to like murder her.
I thought he poisoned it or something.
No, I thought he was like, this was his way of like keeping her in the town and like going somewhere to kill her, basically. Like I was like really certain of it. So he's like, no, I have to throw it away.
Every single time that she mentioned, oh, I want to go home, he was like, oh, to the farmhouse? To the farmhouse?
Yeah. Let's go somewhere else. Yeah. And so he's like, okay, well, we're gonna go to my old high school, which is funny because he is the janitor, he works at the high school. He goes to his old high school and he's like, I'm gonna throw it out here. And so he goes to throw it out, and like apparently she's in the car for a long time. For us, it's like 30 seconds, not even like 10 seconds, but apparently she's in there for so long and she's like freaking out. And so he comes back and he's like, I'm sorry. And so they start having a moment, whatever. And he's like, okay, that janitor of the high school is watching us, which is funny because he is the janitor. And so he leaves the car and he locks it or something, whatever. He leaves the car and he leaves the main girl, Lucy, I guess, in there. And at this point, he slipped up and called her Amy and like Ames. So she's like, what is going on? But also not what is going on because she's not a real person. So she doesn't even realize really. So she's like in this car and she's freaking out because she's going to die of hypothermia. Like, how long does it take? And I was like, stop being dramatic. You've been in there for 30 seconds. But yeah, so he's been in there for a long time. And so she eventually leaves the car, gets locked out, and she walks into the high school and she looks to the side, and the trash can outside of the high school is filled with these burr cups, whatever, which I thought was really freaky. And I was like, this is where he goes to kill all of his suspects or whatever. I was
like, how many women has he brought here?
Yeah, I was like, no, like, don't die. Even though, again, I knew she was fake, but also, like, I didn't know, so I was like, where's this going?
Yeah,
so she goes into high school.
I guess the janitor eats a lot of the little burr cups. I guess that's
right. I guess, yeah, that's like his favorite or whatever. Which poor guy.
If you like it, I mean, blizzards are good. I don't.
Yeah.
That's fine. Regardless, so Lucy goes into the high school to try to find Jake, and then she sees this janitor, so she kind of tries to hide from him initially. And then, obviously he rounds the corner and he's like, hey, what are you doing here? And so she kind of mentions at this point, oh, I'm looking for my boyfriend. Like, his name is Jake. And then he asks, oh, what does he look like? And at this point, I think the one he says, what does he look like? That was muted, right?
Yeah, it was muted. But if you had subtitles, you could hear a lot more. So that was nice.
Yeah, definitely put on your subtitles if you're watching this. Regardless, so he says, oh, what does he look like? But again, that was muted. So if you're not watching the subtitles, I'm sure they put something up there so you would know, but regardless. And so then she kind of jumps into this thing where essentially she doesn't know. And this is kind of where you find out the true identity of Lucy and who this Lucy person is besides, not who Jake wants her to be. Because Lucy is technically a real person, like she's a real physical person, but she was just who Jake chose to project all of these things that he wants onto. So she was a woman that he saw at the trivia night. But Lucy kind of explains the reality was that she was there with her girlfriend and they were celebrating their anniversary. And there was this creepy guy staring at her, and the creepy guy was Jake, and he wouldn't, kind of leave her alone. And at that point, she jumps into a whole thing saying, oh, that's why I wish I had my boyfriend with me, because if you have your boyfriend, then other guys leave you alone. And it's kind of like a double-edged sword in a sense, or where you feel like property, you're owned by them. She compares Jake to one of the 1,000 non-events in her life, things like that, kind of showing that they never had a relationship, they never met, they never talked, anything like that. And again, this further proves that Lucy is just a person that Jake saw once and was like, yep, she's cute, she could be the perfect woman for me. Let me say that she's all of these things in my mind in this fantasy that I've created.
And then after that, my favorite scene personally, and I think, Megan, you can agree, it was a really good scene.
It was really pretty.
It was really pretty. So basically, while Lucy, I guess, is looking for Jake, they find each other, and then out of nowhere, you see behind them comes these two, like, stunt double-looking people, and they go to each other, and they start dancing, like a full-on ballet. And so now that you mentioned that story about how Lucy had a different boyfriend, I figured out what the ballet scene meant now that you say that. I think what it was supposed to be was like Lucy's actual life, like the actual life she had, because basically it was her and this man were dancing together and they were about to get married, and then the janitor, but younger, so assumingly that is Jake, tries to like steal her away from her husband, and then in the end the janitor dies and the husband and the wife end up together again. So I'm assuming that's what Lucy's actual life is in real life, right? I guess, because at the end he ends up dying, which later, again, spoiler, he ends up dying, the janitor / Jake, which I read in the book. They don't really specify really that much in the movie, but in the book he dies by suicide, which, it's pretty sad. So I thought that whole scene was really pretty, and it was like a whole ballet. I loved it.
No, it was really nice. But what I did also think of the scene, I thought that in the actual ballet itself, that the person that represented Jake died. I thought he was the one that got stabbed.
No, it was the janitor. Okay. It was the janitor.
Regardless, I know that I did read something that did say that this kind of, Jake, the janitor, had this obsession with, media and pop culture and the romanticized idea of things. And I know Dina mentioned she looked up one of the authors he mentioned earlier, and he was one of like the founders of Romanticism. So he kind of always had this romanticized kind of view on everything. And so, of course, to represent this, I guess, struggle that he had kind of dealing with Lucy and then his life and then the life she had, everything like that, he kind of views it in this very beautiful, again, romanticized type of way, a beautiful ballet, very dramatic, very theatrical. And so it was interesting to kind of think of that he, even in his own kind of fantasy, he justifies things through a very theatrical, dramatic way, in a sense.
Yeah. And so I think at this point we can get into the last leg of the movie that really creeped me out, that I just found really unnecessary, not unnecessary, but just I didn't like it. I liked it artistically, but not I don't know, it was just weird.
It was weird.
When the janitor dies. And so basically he is a janitor and he gets into his car and he's about to start, he's ending his day of cleaning the school. You kind of see the end is him cleaning up that dance scene, which I thought was funny.
Yeah.
And so he ends his day, he goes into his car and he just starts freaking out, and you see flashbacks from throughout the movie and his head, and he strips himself naked in this car, he's just going insane. And then out of nowhere he starts hallucinating this cartoon, and the cartoon was I guess the ad for Tulsi Town where they got the ice cream. And then at the end of the cartoon comes this pig from earlier, the maggot pig, right? And he follows the pig. Did you understand that? Because I didn't.
Where he follows
the pig. Yeah.
I guess what you could say, I guess symbolically, I don't really know what it could mean, because it was just an animated pig with the maggots. But I know, we were saying earlier, to the fact that, I mean, this was a major event, I guess, throughout Jake's life. I mean, he mentioned it, like one of the first things that he really wanted to talk about, like, oh, the lambs that are dead right there. Oh, don't talk about them. Let's talk about these pigs that aren't even here.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, so that was like a big thing, I think, that really affected him. So I guess upon, reflecting in his life and when he could pick one thing, I guess, to follow into the school, that's what he chose. I mean, for those watching, if you did see this movie, let us know what you thought about that, because
please do.
it's weird and I would like to talk about it. But
yeah, so
I'm not sure.
He follows the pig into the school, and he's butt naked, might I add.
Of course, naturally.
Naturally, right? How you are. I'm assuming he killed himself at this point, and this is him, like, following the pig into heaven or whatever, the afterlife. He follows it into the school, and then I guess the next scene is, like, he goes into the school auditorium, and then we see the school auditorium is filled with people, including Jake / the janitor's parents, including Lucy, including, like, these girls, like, these teenage girls from high school from earlier, and basically Jake is on stage giving this speech. And might I add, they're all supposedly supposed to look old, but the way they look old is so theatrical and fake looking that it looks ridiculous. Like, I will say, did you ever watch Coraline? The cartoon? His dad looks like the dad from Coraline when he's, like, sickly looking. Like, it was just, like, wrinkles, but, like, it was so theatrical and fake.
Yeah, because the thing with stage makeup is you have to make it look really obvious, because obviously you're watching such a great distance. So it's like when you see all the actors that come off stage and they're like, they play an older character in these plays. When they come off stage and you walk up next to them, there you can see, like, just the lines that are the wrinkles. Like, they just put the contour on, so you just see the lines. So that's what it was like.
It was ridiculous. And basically Jake is up on the stage, and the background, his backdrop is Oklahoma. I read it. I didn't know this at first. I had to read it. I also did not watch Oklahoma as much as I love musical theater. And so his backdrop is Oklahoma, and he's giving a speech to a Nobel Peace Prize, which we Googled was the same speech as this guy, John Nash, economist John Nash, when he won the Nobel Prize, and it was based off of this movie called A Beautiful Mind, where Russell Crowe played him, something like that. He got an Oscar for it, apparently, and so it was like the same exact speech as that, and it was kind of like a love speech, I guess. Did you like understand that speech at all?
No, but I do know he jumps into a lovely song next.
Lovely, beautiful, some might say. And basically he gives this really long song that I was kind of debating just skipping over, because I was like, I just don't want to hear this. But then he finishes the song, and it was very obvious not his own voice. Like, I didn't look it up, but I wonder who actually sang that song, because it was good. It was a good singer.
Yeah, but I did look up that song though. It's called Lonely Room. It's from Oklahoma, obviously. And it says it's a song about walking away from isolation and an imaginary girl becoming stronger and taking charge of your life.
Oh, okay, wait, so it's symbolic. I didn't know that.
No,
okay,
I'm assuming, they're not gonna pick something random, I feel like. I don't know how accurate that is, because I don't know what the musical Oklahoma is about.
No,
but,
do I.
I mean, that kind of fits perfectly.
It fits perfectly. It's exactly what it is. So I guess that's what it's about. And so basically it ends, and he gets like a standing ovation, but the first person to stand up is this theatrical, I guess, version of Lucy. And it's like, that's basically the end. And like, oh, no. And then you see, as the credits roll, you see the janitor's truck covered in snow, just like piles of snow, assuming that he is dead at this point. And
Yep, and that's the end. But I will say, I made this mistake with the Into the Spider-Verse movie. I messed up. I didn't watch to the end of the credits, and so I refused to let it happen. Apparently, at the end of these credits, we stick around, not for the whole entire thing of them, but just as long as you can see the truck still in the background. You hear it says clunking in the subtitles, but to me, it kind of sounds like an engine turning over almost. So it definitely leaves this movie very open-ended, because obviously, firsthand, if you watch the movie, you see, the car covered in snow, you're like, oh, that's sad. He killed him.
He's dead.
He's dead. You let him just be snowed in and just froze to death is what we would assume. But then you hear kind of this engine turning over, and it's almost like, did he change his mind? Did he not?
Who knows? Yeah.
Exactly. So it's definitely an open-ended type of movie, which I like those, but those are exceedingly frustrating for me. I like to
Yeah,
have
I agree.
answers.
I want more. I want closure.
Okay.
I want
But,
full closure.
same. But I will say though, like that final scene where you see the car and it's covered in snow, like it's beautifully, like the
Shot.
coloring of the scene,
Yeah.
it's beautifully
It's
shot.
like
The way,
blue.
like the filter they put on it, it's very beautiful. I
Mhm.
mean, it seems almost serene in comparison to the blizzard that lasted throughout the entire movie. It's finally calm. It's no longer snowing, like clear skies,
Yeah.
basically. So it's almost like, I mean, he's come to the conclusion. That was it. Like
Yeah,
the
he's
storm,
calm now. He doesn't have
yeah, exactly. The
these
storm of his
fantasies in his
life.
head.
Yeah, the storm
Yeah.
of his life is over now. Things like that. I mean, it's definitely interesting. It was definitely intentional. I will say this movie, everything that happened, as seemingly random as they were definitely all intentional. So I mean, that's always
Mhm.
nice. It's
I feel
definitely
like that's always movies
mm-hmm.
that seem random, I feel like they always have some sort of symbolic meaning behind them.
Oh,
Plenty
for
of
sure.
movies are like that, yeah. Movies that, as you said earlier, before this show, whatever, you said movies that feel like a fever dream,
Oh,
they usually have some sort of meaning behind them.
yeah, I did say we
So,
felt like a fever dream because it definitely does. It seems so
yeah.
odd as you're moving through it, but it's definitely interesting and worth it at the end, especially if you take an extra minute to either watch this type of video that kind of breaks it down, or just a discussion about it, or articles, or anything like that. I mean, I think it makes it interesting. I like
Mhm.
doing that for movies.
Yep.
But regardless, I mean, that's pretty much all that I have. Dina, do you have anything else?
Yeah, that's pretty much all for me. Don't forget to follow our socials at Boca Tribune on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And if you'd like to rewatch this later, get another inside scoop or something like that, make sure to you can rewatch this on Facebook, IGTV, or YouTube.
Yes. And then join us here next week again, next Tuesday, 7 p.m. We're going to be reviewing Lady Bird. So we'll
Yep.
see you all then. All right. Thanks.
Bye.